Good evening and welcome back, friends. Tonight, we are going to journey through the winter that never ended, America's forgotten ice years. As always, let me know where in the world you are listening in from. Get cozy, settle in, and let's begin. She stood at the frost-covered window. Her breath formed clouds in the June air. Outside, snow fell on what should have been green cornfields. Her children huddled by the dying fire. They wrapped themselves in every blanket the family owned. She whispered a prayer, the same prayer she had whispered every morning for weeks. She asked God when spring would finally come. She did not know this was only the beginning. Picture thousands of similar scenes across the American frontier. Thousands of windows, thousands of prayers whispered into the impossible cold. What happened in 1816 was merely a prelude, a warning that no one heeded. 20 years later, something far worse came to the American interior. This time it would last not 1 year, but 3 brutal winters. They bled into each other without mercy, without explanation, without end. Between 1836 and 1838, a climate catastrophe struck North America. It has been nearly erased from popular memory. Historians debate the causes today. Solar minimums, volcanic eruptions half a world away, or a deadly combination of forces beyond human understanding. The pioneers who lived through it had no such explanations. They had only survival. They had only the next day, and the day after that, if they were lucky enough to see it. This is their story. The story that America chose to forget. What you are about to hear challenges everything you thought you knew about westward expansion. Textbooks celebrate the march of civilization across the continent. They praise the brave pioneers, claiming their piece of the American dream. But they rarely mention the winters that nearly ended it all. They do not talk about the settlements that simply vanished. They do not discuss the mass graves discovered decades later, or the journals hidden in attics, journals filled with words that survivors could not bear to speak aloud. This is the story of the winter that never ended, and the people who somehow lived to see spring again. Late 1835. The American frontier hummed with optimism. The economy was booming. Land was cheap. Opportunity seemed limitless. Thousands of families poured westward into territories that promised fertile soil and new beginnings. Michigan Territory, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. These were the lands of promise. These were the places where a man could build something from nothing. A young couple in their early 20s had just claimed 160 acres in Michigan Territory. They were newlyweds. She was pregnant with their first child. He had spent the summer building a one-room cabin with his own hands. The logs were chinked with mud and moss. The roof was solid. The door hung true. They planned their first full harvest together. She planted a small garden near the cabin. Carrots, potatoes, beans. He cleared 3 acres for corn. At night they sat by the fire and talked about the future, about the children they would have, about the farm they would build, about growing. Old together on this land, an older family arrived in Illinois in the autumn of 1835. They had come from Pennsylvania, a mother and father with 3 children under 10 years old. They had sold everything they owned for this chance. The wagon journey had taken 6 weeks. The children were tired but excited. The father staked his claim near a creek. Good water, timber nearby, rich black soil that crumbled in his hands. He told his wife this was it. This was where they would prosper. She believed him. They all did. In Ohio, a widower worked a small farm with his 2 teenage daughters. His wife had died of fever the previous summer. The grief was still raw, but he had responsibilities. Daughters to feed, a farm to maintain, a future to secure. For them, the older girl was 16, capable, strong. She helped with everything. The younger was 14, still learning, still growing. Together, the 3 of them made it work. They honored the memory of the wife and mother they had lost by surviving, by building, by moving forward. This was frontier life in late 1835. Hard but hopeful. Isolated but connected through shared struggle. Communities were small but tight-knit. Neighbors helped neighbors. Barn raisings brought everyone together. Churches served as social centers. Sunday services were as much about community as worship. People traded labor, traded goods, traded gossip and news from back east. The isolation was real. Some homesteads were miles from the nearest neighbor, but people found ways to stay connected, to remain human in the wilderness. Daily routines followed the sun. Wake before dawn, tend the livestock, milk the cows, feed the chickens, collect eggs. Breakfast was simple. Cornmeal mush, salt pork if you had it. Then the work began. Men cleared land, plowed fields, mended fences, chopped endless cords of firewood. Women tended gardens, preserved food, made soap, sewed clothes, raised children. Everyone worked. Even the smallest children had chores, gathering kindling, feeding chickens, watching younger siblings. There was no such thing as idle time on the frontier. As autumn 1835 arrived, families began their winter preparations. These were routines they knew well. They had survived winters before. They salted meat, packed pork and beef in barrels with salt and brine. The meat would keep all winter this way. They filled root cellars with potatoes, turnips, carrots, squash, onions. They dried beans, preserved fruits, made apple butter, rendered lard. Every scrap of food was precious. Nothing was wasted. Firewood was crucial. Men spent weeks cutting and stacking wood, cord after cord after cord. A family could burn through several cords in a hard winter. The stacks grew higher. Oak for long burning, maple for cooking, pine for quick heat. The wood had to dry, green. Would wood smoke and not burn hot? So they cut wood a season ahead when they could. The wood piles near cabins stood taller than a man. They looked like enough. They always had been enough before. The young couple in Michigan worked together on their preparations. He hunted, brought home deer and wild turkey. She preserved the meat. They worked side by side. Her belly grew with the pregnancy. He worried about her working too hard. She laughed and told him women had been having babies since the beginning of time. She would be fine. The baby would come in May, spring, when everything was green and growing. It seemed perfect. The family in Illinois worked frantically to prepare. They had arrived late in the season. They had less time. The father pushed himself. Hard. Too hard. His wife worried. But they got it done. Meat preserved, vegetables stored, firewood stacked. The cabin was small but well built. They had purchased it from a family moving back east. The previous owners had said they missed civilization, missed family. The father thought they were foolish. This land was too good to abandon. His wife was not so sure, but she kept her doubts to herself. The widower and his daughters prepared. Methodically, they had done this before. Last year they had done it without a wife and mother. This year was easier in some ways. The grief was less sharp. The routines were established. The older daughter had learned her mother's preservation techniques. The younger helped without complaint. They worked together in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that comes from shared loss and shared survival. They would make it through another winter. They had to. December 1835 arrived cold and early. The first snows came before Thanksgiving, heavier than usual. The temperatures dropped fast. Old-timers mentioned it reminded them of 1816, the year without a summer. But the younger settlers dismissed the comparison. Every old-timer thought their memories were the worst. This was just a hard winter, nothing more. They had food, they had shelter, they had firewood. They would be fine. By January 1836, something felt different. The cold had a quality that went beyond mere temperature. It was bone-penetrating, relentless, aggressive, the kind of cold that found every crack in a cabin wall, every gap around a door, every weakness in your clothing. People wore layers, wool on wool on wool. They stayed close to fires. They moved less, conserved energy, conserved heat, conserved everything. Animals behaved strangely. Livestock refused to leave their barns. Horses stood in corners, unmoving. Even when offered food, cows produced less milk. Chickens stopped laying. The wildlife disappeared. Deer vanished from the forests. Rabbits seemed to evaporate. Tracks in the snow became rare, then non-existent. Hunters returned empty-handed day after day. Where had everything gone? The young man in Michigan noticed the silence first. The forest was always noisy. Birds, squirrels, the rustle of small animals, whined through leaves. But now there was nothing. Just silence and wind. The wind never stopped. It howled around the cabin at night. His wife pressed close to him for warmth, for comfort. She was 7 months pregnant now. He felt the baby kick against his back sometimes when they slept. He wondered what kind of world this child would be born into. In Illinois, the children asked their father why it was so cold. He told them God was testing them, testing their faith, their strength, their family. The mother said nothing. She watched. Their food stores. She calculated in her head. If winter ended in March like it should, they would be fine. But something in her gut told her March might not bring spring this year. The widower in Ohio kept a journal. He had started it after his wife died, a way to process grief, to feel less alone. In late January 1836, he wrote an entry that he would later try to burn. He wrote that the cold felt wrong, not natural, that he had a feeling of dread he could not shake, that his daughters felt it too, though they did not speak of it. He wrote that he was afraid, not of dying, but of failing to protect his girls, of not being enough. February arrived. It should have shown signs of weakening. Winter, longer days, occasional thaws. The promise of spring lurking beneath the cold. But February 1836 brought none of these things. It brought deeper cold, more snow, storms that lasted days. The sun appeared rarely. When it did, it seemed weak, pale, unable to warm anything. People began to worry, really worry. This was beyond a normal hard winter. Food stores were being depleted. Faster than expected. You burned more firewood in extreme cold. You ate more to maintain body heat. The calculations that had seemed conservative in November now seemed optimistic. Families began to ration. Smaller portions, fewer meals. Make it stretch. Make it last. Spring would come. It had to come. But as February turned to March, and March brought no relief, only more snow and more cold, a new emotion crept into Frontier. Cavern's fear, real fear, the kind that sits in your stomach and grows, the kind that wakes you at night, the kind that makes you count your remaining potatoes and feel panic rising in your chest, because spring should be here, and it was not. Coming, March 1836. The month that should bring thaw and birdsong and the first signs of life returning. Instead, it brought blizzards, heavy wet snow that collapsed roofs, winds that tore at cabin walls, temperatures that dropped so low that water froze solid inside homes, despite the fires burning constantly. People began to understand. This was not a normal winter. This was something else entirely. The young wife in Michigan went into labor on March 15th, 3 weeks early. Her husband rode through a blizzard to fetch the nearest midwife. She lived 4 miles away. He almost did not make it. The horse struggled through chest-deep drifts. The wind cut through every layer he wore. He found the midwife. She came. They rode back together. The journey that should have taken an hour took 3. The baby came that night. A girl, small but healthy, she cried strong. The mother wept with relief and exhaustion and fear. The midwife stayed 2 days until the storm broke. When she left, she told them the baby would need extra warmth, extra care. The mother already knew. She held the infant against her skin constantly, shared her body heat, prayed the cold would break before her milk ran thin. In Illinois, the family made a decision. They would send the eldest boy to the nearest town, 12 miles south, to buy supplies, if any could be had, extra flour, salt, anything. The boy was 8 years old, small for his age, but tough. His father gave him careful instructions. Follow the creek, stay near cover. If a storm comes, find shelter and wait it out. The mother packed him food for 2 days. She kissed his forehead, told him to be safe. He left before dawn. He returned 4 days later, frostbitten, exhausted, empty-handed. The town had nothing to sell. Their stores were depleted too. Everyone was rationing. Everyone was afraid. He had slept in a barn the first night, a chicken coop the second. A family had taken him in on the 3rd night, fed him soup, let him warm by their fire. They had children his age, thin children with hollow eyes. He came home and told his parents what he had seen. His father nodded. said nothing. His mother turned away so the children would not see her cry. The widower in Ohio made an inventory in mid-March. He wrote down every item of food they had left. 2 bushels of potatoes, some sprouting, half a barrel of salt pork, 1 small sack of cornmeal, dried beans, maybe 20 pounds, some preserved apples, not many, he calculated. If they were very careful, if they ate little, if spring came in April, they might make it. Might, he gathered his daughters, sat them down, told them the truth. They were running low on food. They would need to ration carefully. The older daughter asked if they would starve. He could not lie to her. He said he did not know, but they would do everything possible to survive. They would hunt, they would trap, they would make every scrap. Count, she nodded. The younger daughter started to cry. The older put her arm around her sister, told her they would be all right. The widower was not sure which of them she was trying to convince. April came. April that should burst with life and warmth and renewal. April that should mean planting time and spring rain and hope. This April brought none of those things. The ground remained frozen solid, 18 inches deep, 2 feet in some places. No plow could break it. No seed could be planted. Even if they tried, nothing would grow in this cold. Families faced a terrible realization. Even if spring came tomorrow, the growing season was too short now. Crops planted in late April might not mature before full frost. And full frost in this new reality might come in August, or July, or never. Leave it all? The cycle of farming that had sustained human civilization for thousands of years was broken, and no one knew how to fix it. The young couple in Michigan began hunting for any food source. The man set snares for rabbits. The traps stayed empty. He tried fishing through the ice. Nothing, not even the fish were biting. He ranged farther from the cabin, looking for any game, any sign of life. His wife worried when he was gone. She sat by the window with the baby, watched for his return. Sometimes he was gone for 2 days. When he came back with nothing, they did not speak of it. They simply held each other and their daughter and tried not to think about tomorrow. Neighbors began to disappear. The family 2 miles east was there. One day, gone the next. Their cabin door stood open, their belongings left behind. Only the food was gone, and their wagon, and their animals. They had fled south, or tried to. No one knew if they made it. More families followed. Every week someone else left. The community that had been tight-knit was fraying, unraveling. People made choices for their own survival now. There was no room for collective thinking anymore. Some tried to help each other still. Families with slightly more food shared with those who had less. But even generosity has limits when your own children are starving. A man in Indiana gave his last potatoes to a neighbor. His own family went without for a week. When his wife confronted him, he said it was the Christian thing to do. She said Christian charity would not save their sons. They argued. It was the first real argument of their marriage. There would be many more before spring finally came. Churches held special services, prayer meetings, asking God for deliverance, for spring, for mercy. Attendance was sparse. Travel was too dangerous. Faith was wavering. A preacher in Illinois gave a sermon about Job, about suffering that tests faith, about endurance through trial. 3 families walked out. One man stood and shouted that God had abandoned them. The preacher had no answer, because maybe he had. By late April 1836, reality had set in. This was not going to end. Not soon. Maybe not ever. People stopped saying spring would come. They stopped making plans. They focused only on surviving the day in front. Of then, nothing more. The future was too uncertain, too terrifying. Better not to think beyond the next meal, the next night, the next morning, if you were lucky enough to see it. The psychological toll was as brutal as the physical. People began to break under the strain. A woman in Wisconsin stopped speaking entirely, just sat by her fire, staring. Her husband tried everything. She would not respond. Their children were terrified. Eventually the husband took the children and left. He could not stay with a woman who had stopped being present. Some said he was cruel. Others said he did what he had to do. There was no right answer anymore. Marriages strained. Parents fought. Children grew silent and withdrawn. The pressure of constant survival wore away at human connections, at love, at compassion, at everything that made life worth living. People became hollow, going through motions, existing but not living, waiting for an end they could not see, and still the cold did not break. May arrive, May that should be warm and green, May that should mean gardens growing and livestock grazing. This May was grey and frozen. Snow fell on the 10th, again on the 18th, again on the 23rd. People stopped being surprised. They just accepted. This was the world now. Cold and dead and endless. But something else was coming. Something worse. Because as terrible as this first winter had been, it was only a prelude. The summer of 1836 would bring brief hope. Just enough to make people believe the worst was over. Just enough to make them vulnerable. And then winter would return. Colder, longer, more deadly. Wait until you hear what happens next. Spring refused to come. That is the simplest way to describe what happened in 1836. Spring simply refused to arrive. March became April, April became May, and still the ground stayed frozen. Still the snow fell. Still the temperatures remained far below what any living person had. Experience. The young mother in Michigan Territory held her baby and watched the window. Every day she looked for signs. A bird, a patch of bare ground, anything that suggested winter was weakening. She saw nothing but white, endless white. Her husband ventured out less now. The cold was too dangerous. The exertion burned calories. They could not afford to lose. He sat by the fire and stared at the walls. She knew what he was thinking. The same thing she was thinking. How long can we last? Their food stores had dwindled to almost nothing. The potatoes were gone. The preserved meat was gone. They had cornmeal, perhaps enough for 2 more weeks if they were careful, if they made it thin, if they did not mind the constant gnawing hunger. The baby nursed, but the mother's milk was weak. She could feel it. Not enough fat, not enough nutrition. The baby cried more now. A thin, desperate sound that cut through the cabin's silence like a knife. In Illinois, the family faced their own crisis. They had 5 mouths to feed, 3 children, 2 adults. The mathematics were brutal. They cut their portions again. And again. The children stopped asking for more. They understood somehow, even the youngest. She was only 4, but she had learned not to complain. Learned that complaining changed nothing. The mother watched her children grow thinner. Their faces became angular, their eyes too large, their movements slower. She wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness, but rage would not bring spring. So she stayed silent and counted the days. The father went hunting every few days. He never found anything, but he went anyway, because sitting in the cabin watching his family starve was worse than freezing in the forest. At least in the forest he was trying. At least he was doing something. He set traps. He checked them religiously. They stayed empty. He tried fishing through ice on the creek. Nothing. The fish had gone dormant or died. He did not know which. He returned empty-handed every time. His wife would look at him. He would shake his head. No words necessary. They both knew. The widower in Ohio and his daughters had become experts at survival. They burned furniture for warmth when the firewood ran out. A chair one week, a table the next. They ate 1 meal a day. Soup stretched so thin it was barely more than hot water. They trapped a squirrel once. 1 squirrel for 3 people. They made it last 2 days. They boiled the bones for broth, sucked the marrow, used every part. Nothing was wasted. Nothing could be wasted. The older daughter took on more responsibility. She was 17 now, though she looked younger. Malnutrition had stunted her growth, hollowed her cheeks, but her mind was sharp. She kept track of their supplies, rationed, carefully, made decisions about what to eat and when. Her father let her. He trusted her judgment. She had her mother's practical nature, her mother's strength. Sometimes he looked at her and saw his dead wife. It was comforting and heartbreaking in equal measure. The younger daughter was 15. She spoke less than before. The cold and hunger had made her withdrawn. She did her chores without complaint, helped where she could. But there was a distance. In her eyes, a remove. Her father worried about her, about what this experience was doing to her mind. To her spirit, he tried to engage her in conversation. She would answer in single words. Yes, no, maybe, then return to silence. He did not know how to reach her anymore. Communities that had held together through the winter began to fracture. Trust eroded. A family in Michigan discovered their hidden food cache had been raided. Someone had broken in while they slept, taken half their remaining supplies. They suspected a neighbor, a man they had helped the previous autumn, but they could not prove it, and confrontation seemed pointless. Everyone was desperate. Everyone was capable of terrible things when survival was at stake. Theft became common. People took what they needed to live. A chicken here, a bag of grain there, tools, blankets, firewood, anything that might help them survive another day. Some felt guilt, others felt nothing. Morality becomes flexible when you are watching your children starve. The social contract that held frontier communities together was dissolving, replaced by something more primal, more brutal. Every family for themselves. Churches tried to maintain order, to provide spiritual comfort, but attendance dropped. People could not afford the calories to walk to services, could not spare the time away from survival, could not reconcile a loving God with this endless cold. A preacher in Indiana Territory gave his final sermon in April. He told his sparse congregation that God worked in mysterious ways, that suffering brought them closer to heaven, that this was a test of faith. A farmer stood up, said his 3-year-old daughter had died 2 nights before, asked what she was being tested for. The preacher had no answer. The church never held another service. Parents made impossible choices. A couple in Illinois debated whether to eat their last seed corn. It was meant for planting, for the future, for hope. But their son was dying, 6 years old and dying of starvation. They could see it, his body consuming itself, his ribs visible through his shirt, his eyes sunken. They ground the seed corn into meal, made bread, fed him. He ate slowly. His stomach had shrunk. He could not eat much, but it was something. They had chosen survival today over the possibility of food tomorrow. They would live with that choice for the rest of their lives. Livestock died. Cattle froze in their barns. Horses became too weak to stand. Pigs huddled together for warmth, but still succumbed to the cold. Chickens stopped laying entirely. People slaughtered their animals, not according to any plan, just when they became desperate enough. Each slaughter was a small tragedy. That cow represented future milk, future. Calves, future security. But future meant nothing when you might not survive the week. So they killed and ate and tried not to think about tomorrow. The meat from livestock helped, but it went fast. A family could butcher a pig and eat well for a few days. Then the meat was gone, and they were back where they started. Hungry, desperate, counting down to nothing. Some families tried to preserve the meat, to make it last, but without sufficient salt. Without proper cold storage that did not involve simply leaving it outside where wolves might take it, the meat spoiled, or got stolen, or disappeared in the night. May arrived with no warmth, no green, no life. May there should be planting season brought instead more snow, more cold, more death. People stopped keeping track of dates. What was the point? Time had lost meaning. There was only day and night, hunger and cold, survival and death. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else existed. The young man in Michigan made a decision. They had to leave, had to try to reach his brother's farm in southern Ohio. It was 200 miles, through frozen wilderness, with a 4-month-old baby. His wife thought he was insane, said they would die on the road. He said they would die here. At least moving gave them a chance. They argued, quietly, so as not to wake the baby. He wanted to leave immediately. She wanted to wait for weather to break. He said the weather was not going to break. She knew he was right. But she also knew their chances of surviving a 200-mile winter journey were close to zero. They compromised. They would wait 1 more week. If the weather did not improve, they would go. They both knew it would not improve. But the compromise gave them something. A deadline, a decision point, a plan. Even a futile plan was better than sitting and waiting. To die. They spent the week preparing. He made a sled from cabin boards. She sewed carrying sacks. They packed their few remaining possessions, some clothes, a pot, a knife, a blanket, and the baby. Always the baby. In Illinois, the father watched his children and made calculations. They had food for perhaps 10 more days. After that, nothing. He had no plan for day 11. No ideas, no options. He had exhausted every possibility, every resource, every connection. They were alone, isolated, and running out of time. He told his wife they might need to consider sending the children to town to find families who could take them in. She refused, said they would stay together. Whatever happened, they would face as a family. He did not argue. He understood. But he also knew that keeping the family together might mean watching all of them die. The widower in Ohio faced a different calculation. His daughters were old enough to understand, old enough to participate in decisions. He sat them both down, told them they had food for maybe 2 weeks, asked them what they thought they should do. The older daughter said they should stay, that leaving was more dangerous than staying. The younger said nothing, just stared at the floor. The widower agreed with his older daughter. They would stay. They would make what they had last as long as possible. They would hope for spring, even though hope felt like a luxury they could not afford. June finally brought a change, not spring. Exactly, but less cold. Temperatures rose above freezing during the day. Snow began to melt. Patches of bare ground appeared. People emerged from their cabins, blinking, disoriented, like animals coming out of hibernation. They looked at their neighbors, saw the same hollow faces, the same haunted eyes, the same question. Did we really survive? But the relief was short. Lived. Because even with warmer weather, it was too late for a normal growing season. Crops planted in June would not mature before fall. And who knew what fall would bring? Who knew if this was really over, or just a brief respite before more? Cold. People planted anyway, because what else could they do? They put precious seeds into still, cold ground, prayed for growth, for warmth, for time. The young couple in Michigan decided to stay. The brief warmth had changed their calculations. They planted a small garden. Corn, beans, squash. The baby was stronger now. The mother's milk had improved slightly with less stress. They felt cautiously optimistic. Maybe the worst was over. Maybe they had survived. They tried not to think about all the families who had not, about the empty cabins they had passed, about the graves marked with simple wooden crosses. They focused on their own survival, on the tiny shoots of green emerging from the soil, on small reasons to hope. In Illinois, the family planted everything they had, every remaining seed. It was a gamble. If the crops failed, they would have nothing. No seeds. For next year, no backup plan. But they could not eat seeds, and they could not wait another year. So they planted, and prayed, and watched the sky nervously, expecting frost, expecting snow, expecting disappointment, because this year had taught them to expect nothing good. The widower and his daughters planted a small plot, just enough for the 3 of them. They had learned efficiency through necessity. No wasted space, no wasted effort, every action calculated for maximum return. They planted fast-growing crops, radishes, lettuce, things that might mature in the shortened season. They avoided crops that needed long growing periods, corn, squash, melons. There was no time. They needed food now, or as close to now as nature. July brought warmth, real warmth. For the first time in what felt like forever, people were too hot instead of too cold. It felt miraculous. Children played outside. Women hung laundry to dry in actual sunshine. Men worked their fields in just shirts. No coats, no layers. It felt like a different world. A world they had almost forgotten existed. Some people wept, just from feeling warm sun on their faces, from remembering what it felt like to be comfortable. The gardens grew, slowly at first. The soil was poor after 2 years of cold. The plants were struggling, but they grew. Green shoots became leaves. Leaves became stalks. Stalks became the promise of food. People watched their gardens obsessively, checked them multiple times a day, measured growth, celebrated every new leaf. These plants represented survival, represented hope, represented the possibility of making it through another winter. But nature was not finished with them. On July 18th, it snowed. Not much, just flurries, but enough. Enough to kill the tender plants, enough to destroy weeks of growth, enough to crush newly formed hope. People walked out to their gardens. That morning, saw the white dusting, saw the blackened leaves, saw their food supply dying in front of them. Some fell to their knees. Some cursed God. Some simply turned around and walked back inside. There was nothing to say, nothing to do. It was happening again. The killing frost was not universal. Some areas escaped. Some gardens survived, but many did not. Families who had planted everything watched everything die. They had gambled on summer. Summer had betrayed them. Now they faced another winter with even less than before. The mathematics were impossible. They could not survive another winter like the last one. They simply could not. August brought more temperature swings, warm days, cold nights. Plants that survived the July frost struggled to grow. The growing season was too short, too unstable. Crops that should take 90 days to mature needed 120 now, because cold nights slowed growth, because the plants were stressed, because nothing was normal anymore. People harvested what they could: small potatoes, stunted corn, vegetables that in normal times they would have discarded. But these were not normal times. They harvested everything, used everything, wasted nothing. The young couple in Michigan harvested a small crop, not enough to last a winter, but something. They dried corn, made it last. Dug potatoes. Tiny potatoes the size of walnuts, but potatoes nonetheless. They counted their stores, made calculations, decided they needed to supplement with hunting, with trapping, with anything they could find. The man began ranging farther again, looking for game. The game was returning. Slowly, deer appeared in the forests, rabbits in the fields. He killed a deer in late August, his first successful hunt in months. They celebrated, ate fresh meat. felt strong for the first time in forever. In Illinois, the family harvested almost nothing. Their garden had been hit hardest by the frost. Only a few plants survived. They gathered what they could, a handful of beans, some small squash. It was not enough, not even close. The father knew they could not stay, could not survive another winter here. He told his family they would leave before the snow came. Go south, find warmer land, find food, find a way to survive. His wife agreed. The children said nothing. They had learned not to question adult decisions, learned that arguing changed nothing. The widower and his daughters harvested a better crop. Their fast-growing vegetables had matured before the frost. They had radishes, lettuce, some early peas. It was not much, but combined with careful rationing, it might be enough. Might. The older daughter did the calculations, told her father. They would need to find additional food. He nodded, said he would try. She knew what that meant. Hunting, trapping, foraging, taking risks. She did not argue. They needed food. Risk was unavoidable. September arrived cold. Too cold for September. People looked at each other with understanding. It was starting again. The brief summer was over. Winter was returning. And this time they knew what to expect. This time there would be no surprise, no shock. Only grim preparation. Only the knowledge that they had barely survived the first time. And now they had to do it again, with less food, less strength, less hope. The psychology of facing a second winter was different from the first. The first winter had carried shock, disbelief, the constant expectation that surely this would end soon. The second winter carried no such illusions. People knew what was coming. They remembered the hunger, the cold, the fear, the losses, and they knew they were weaker now, less prepared, more vulnerable. The knowledge sat heavy on everyone who remained. Many families chose to leave before winter set in. Migration south became a steady stream. Wagons loaded with whatever possessions people could carry. Children wrapped in blankets. Livestock trailing behind. They abandoned cabins. Abandoned land claims. Abandoned dreams. Survival mattered more than property now. More than pride. More than the promise of the frontier. They headed toward Kentucky, Tennessee, places where winter might be survivable. The young couple in Michigan debated leaving daily. Every conversation came back to it. Should they go? Should they stay? He wanted to try one more winter. They had more food this time, more experience, more knowledge of what to expect. She was not convinced. The baby was only 6 months old. Traveling with an infant in winter was suicide. But staying might be too. They went in circles, never deciding, paralyzed by impossible choices. A neighbor stopped by in mid-September, an older man who had lived in Michigan Territory for 10 years. He told them he was leaving, heading to his sister's farm in Kentucky. He offered to take them with him. Safety in numbers, shared resources, shared risk. The young man looked at his wife. She looked at the baby. The neighbor said he was leaving in 3 days, with or without them. Think about it, he left. They thought about it. They thought about nothing else. In the end, they decided to stay. The risks of travel seemed greater than the risks of staying. They had a cabin, firewood, some food, a chance. The journey was hundreds of miles through increasingly hostile weather with a baby. The math did not work, so they stayed. They watched their neighbor's wagon disappear down the trail, wondered if they had made the right choice, knew they would never know until it was too late to change their minds. In Illinois, the family prepared to leave. They sold what they could, traded the rest, packed a wagon with essentials. They left in late September, before the first snow. The father took one last look at their cabin, at the land he had dreamed would make his fortune. His wife put a hand on his arm, told him they would come back someday. He nodded but did not believe her, neither did she. They climbed onto the wagon. The children huddled in the back. They started south, toward an uncertain future. But at least it was movement. At least it was trying. The journey south was hard. The roads were poor. Mud, ruts, fallen trees. The wagon broke an axle on the third day. The father spent half a day repairing it. They pushed on. Other families traveled the same roads. Sometimes they camped together, shared fires, shared stories. Everyone had the same tale: cold, hunger, loss, death. The stories became repetitive, became numbing. After a while, people stopped sharing, just nodded at each other, understanding without words. They reached southern Illinois after 2 weeks. The father inquired about land. Prices had dropped. So many people fleeing south had flooded the market. He found a small farm, 40 acres. The previous owner had died. His widow was selling. The father offered what he had. It was not much. She accepted anyway. She just wanted to go back east, back to family, back to safety. The Illinois family had a new home, farther south, maybe far enough. The widower and his daughters stayed in Ohio. They had discussed leaving, but decided against it. The older daughter argued they knew this land, knew where to hunt, where to trap, where to find water. Starting over somewhere new meant learning everything again, meant being vulnerable in unfamiliar territory. Better to face the devil you know. Her father agreed. The younger daughter said nothing. She rarely spoke anymore, just existed. Moving through routines mechanically, October brought the first hard freeze, earlier than normal. Earlier than even last year. People who had hoped for a longer autumn were disappointed. Winter was not waiting, was not merciful. It arrived with force and fury. Temperatures dropped below zero. Snow fell heavy and steady. Within 2 weeks, the world was white again, frozen again, dead again. The young couple in Michigan settled into survival mode. They knew the rhythms now, knew how to ration, how to stay warm, how to maintain hope when everything felt hopeless. The man hunted when weather permitted. He had learned to read the cold, to know when going out was risk versus suicide. He caught rabbits occasionally. Small game, it helped. Not enough, but something. The woman focused on the baby, keeping her warm, keeping her fed, keeping her alive. The baby was their reason to continue. Without her, they might have given up, might have laid down and waited for the end, but she needed them, depended on them, so they kept going, kept trying, kept fighting, even when they were exhausted, even when they wanted to quit. They looked at her face and found strength they did not know they had. Communities that had not already dissolved finished dissolving. People stopped visiting, stopped checking on neighbors. The isolation became total. Each family alone in their cabin, alone in their struggle, alone in the dark. The only sounds were wind and cold and occasionally wolves. The wolves had returned, hungry, desperate, like everyone else. They came close to cabins at night, howling, looking for weakness, looking for opportunity. A family 3 miles from the young couple disappeared in November. The husband went to check on them after not seeing smoke from their chimney for several days. He found the cabin empty, the door hanging open. Snow drifted inside. No signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies, just absence. They had left, or something had taken them. Or they had died and been buried or dragged off. He did not know, would never know. He went home, told his wife. They barred their door that night, and every night after, death became common. Expected. A family in Indiana lost their youngest child, a boy of 3. He simply did not wake up one. Mourning, malnutrition, cold, pneumonia. Probably all 3. They buried him in snow because the ground was frozen, marked the spot with stones, planned to give him a proper burial in spring. If spring came, if they survived to see it, the mother stopped speaking after that, just rocked in her chair, staring at nothing. The father tried to reach her, could not. Eventually he stopped trying. Illness spread through weakened populations. People with no reserves, no immunity, no strength to fight. Pneumonia, influenza, infections from minor cuts that would normally heal. Bodies shutting down under relentless stress. Some families lost multiple members, a father and 2 sons in 1 week, a mother and infant daughter, entire families, sometimes. Cabins found empty in spring, everyone gone, questions no one wanted to answer. The widower in Ohio kept his family isolated. He had learned from the first winter, contact with others meant risk of illness. They stayed home, stayed separate, stayed alive. The older daughter maintained their routines, rationed food precisely, kept the fire going, kept spirits up as much as possible. The younger daughter helped when asked, but remained distant, locked, inside her own mind, traumatized by 18 months of horror. The widower worried about her, but keeping everyone alive took precedence over mental health. Survival first, healing later. If there was a later, December arrived. The darkest month. Short days. Long nights. Endless darkness, both literal and metaphorical. People sat by fires and tried not to think, tried not to calculate, tried not to realize how bad things were, because thinking made it worse. Awareness made it unbearable. Better to exist moment to moment, not looking forward, not looking back, just being, just surviving. Christmas came and went unmarked. No celebrations, No gifts, no joy. Some families tried to acknowledge it, a special meal, a prayer, but mostly it passed like any other day. Cold, dark, hungry. Religion felt hollow to many now. Hard to believe in divine providence when children starved. Hard to have faith when prayers went unanswered year after year. Some held on to belief, others let it go, released it like one more thing they could not afford to carry. The young man in Michigan carved a small wooden toy for his daughter, a doll. Simple but carefully made. He gave it to her on Christmas morning. She was too young to understand, but his wife cried, not from sadness, from gratitude, that he still tried, still found ways to create beauty, still believed in something beyond mere survival. She held him, told him she loved him. They stayed like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other, from their small family, from the choice to keep going. January 1837 arrived, the coldest month of the coldest winter in memory. Temperatures that made the previous year seem mild, winds that cut through any barrier, cold that penetrated everything. People, or every piece of clothing they owned, layered until they could barely move, and still the cold found them. Still it reached through to skin and bone and soul. Food was running critically low for most families. The math was becoming impossible. Even with strict rationing, supplies would not last until spring. Families faced starvation, real starvation. Not just hunger, but the final stages of the body consuming itself. People grew skeletal, moved slowly, spoke rarely, conserved every calorie, every bit of energy. Some no longer had the strength to gather firewood. They burned furniture, burned cabin walls, anything that would produce heat. The young couple ate. One meal every 2 days. They gave most of their food to keep the wife's milk flowing for the baby. The man was wasting away, his ribs visible, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken. But he never complained, never suggested changing the arrangement. His daughter would eat, would survive, even if he did not. The wife saw what he was doing, begged him to eat more. He refused, said she needed strength for the baby. She did not argue further, because he was right, and because arguing took energy. They did not have. February brought no relief, just more cold, more snow, more death. The widower in Ohio made a final inventory. They had perhaps 3 weeks of food left. After that, nothing. He gathered his daughters, told them the truth. They would need to start hunting more aggressively, taking more risks. It was dangerous, but necessary. The older daughter nodded, said she would help. She had learned to trap, to track, to skin small game, skills her mother never imagined she would need. The younger daughter looked up briefly, then back down. The widower wondered what she was thinking, if she was thinking, or if she had retreated so far inside herself that she was unreachable. But then something changed. Late February brought a warm spell. Temperatures above freezing for 3 consecutive days. Snow melted. The sun appeared, bright, almost cheerful. People emerged from cabins, looked around, dared to hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe winter was breaking. Maybe they had made it through. The warmth lasted a week, then ended abruptly. Temperatures plunged again. Snow returned. But something was different. The cold was less aggressive, less absolute. Spring was not here, but it was coming. Finally, actually coming. People could feel it, could sense it. The rhythm of seasons reasserting itself. Nature remembering how things were supposed. To work march brought increasing warmth. Real thaw. Ice melting on rivers. Snow receding from fields. Mud appearing. Glorious mud. People celebrated mud like it was gold, because mud meant earth, meant ground, meant the possibility of planting, of growing, of food. The young couple in Michigan stood at their window and watched snow melt, watched brown earth emerge. The wife cried. The husband held her. They had survived. Somehow, against all odds, they had survived. Wait until you hear how much worse it gets. The relief of March 1837 was short-lived. Spring arrived tentatively, weakly, like it was unsure of its own existence. Temperatures rose, but not enough, not consistently. Warm days followed by cold nights. Progress followed by setbacks. Nature could not decide what season it wanted to be. People planted anyway, because what choice did they have? They put seeds in cold ground and prayed. The young couple in Michigan planted their entire plot. Every seed they had saved. Every seed they had traded for. Everything. It was all or nothing now. They could not hold anything back. Could not plan for next year. Next year was too far away. Too uncertain. They needed food this year, this growing season, or they would not see another. The man worked the field slowly, his body weakened from months of starvation. His wife helped when she could, the baby strapped to her back, growing, thriving somehow despite everything. In their new home in southern Illinois, the family that had fled hoped for better conditions. Warmer weather, longer growing season, better chances. The father plowed fields, planted corn, beans, squash. The soil was good, better than what they had left behind. But the weather was still wrong, still cold, still unpredictable, he realized, with growing horror that they had not escaped, had only delayed the inevitable. The cold had followed them south, or perhaps it was everywhere. Perhaps there was no escape. The widower in Ohio planted with his daughters. They worked together in silence. The older daughter had become the de facto head of household. She made decisions, organized work, kept them functioning. Her father followed her lead, grateful for her strength. The younger daughter worked mechanically, planting seeds, covering them with soil, watering. Her face remained blank, empty. The widower had accepted that she might never fully return, that the person she had been before the cold was gone, replaced by this hollow version. He mourned her even though she still lived at. April brought frost, killing frost. Not as severe as the previous year, but enough to damage crops, to set back growth, to remind everyone that nature was still hostile, Still unpredictable, still deadly. People watched their seedlings blacken and die, watched weeks of work destroyed overnight. Some replanted, others gave up, decided to focus on foraging, on hunting, on finding food rather than growing it. Trust in agriculture had eroded. The contract between farmer and earth felt broken. Communities were shadows of what they had been. So many had left. So many had died. The ones who remained were changed, hardened, suspicious. The social bonds that had held frontier life together were gone, replaced by wariness, by self-interest, by the understanding that in crisis every person was ultimately alone. Neighbors who had once helped each other now avoided contact, feared obligation, feared the weakness that came from caring about others. A woman in Michigan Territory knocked on the young couple's door in late April. She was gaunt, desperate. Her husband had died in February. She had 3 children, no food, no options. She begged for help, anything they could spare. The young man looked at his wife. They had so little themselves, barely enough for their own family. His wife went inside, came back with a small sack of cornmeal, perhaps 2 pounds. It was a significant portion of their stores. The woman wept, thanked them, left. The young man and his wife never discussed it, never questioned the decision, but they both knew what that cornmeal might cost them later. May brought better weather, warmer, more stable. The crops that survived April began to grow, slowly, struggling, but growing. People tended their gardens obsessively, pulled every weed, watered carefully, talked to the plants, begged them to thrive. These gardens represented everything: hope, survival, future. Without them there was nothing, just slow starvation through another winter. And no one could survive another winter like the last 2. The young couple's garden showed promise. The corn was growing, short stalks, but growing. The beans were climbing, the squash spreading. They allowed themselves to hope, to plan, to imagine a harvest that would see them through. The man hunted regularly now. The game had returned. Deer, rabbits, turkey. He was successful more often, building their stores. They smoked meat, preserved it, prepared for the worst while hoping for better. In southern Illinois, the family's crops grew better. The warmer climate helped. Their corn reached knee-high by late May. The father felt vindicated. They had made the right choice to move. His wife was less certain. She had learned not to trust good fortune, not to believe in progress until it was secured. She watched the sky constantly, waited for the next disaster, for the frost or hail or plague of insects that would destroy everything. Optimism felt dangerous, felt like tempting fate. The widower's garden grew adequately, not abundant but adequate. The older daughter managed it efficiently. She had learned to maximize every inch of soil, every drop of water, every moment of sunlight. She was 17 now, an adult in all. But named she had lost her youth to these winters, lost her innocence, lost a chance to be young and carefree. She did not mourn these losses. There was no time, no space, no energy. She simply existed in the present, did what needed doing, survived, June arrived warm. Summer finally asserting itself. People shed layers, felt sun on skin, remembered what warmth felt like. Children played outside, really played. Not just huddled for warmth, but ran and laughed, and acted like children. Parents watched them with complicated emotions. Joy at seeing childhood return, sorrow for all the childhood lost, fear that this reprieve was temporary, that winter would return too soon. The young couple's baby took her first steps in June, on grass, in sunshine. Her mother cried watching her. This tiny person who had known only cold and hunger and fear was walking, growing, living. It felt miraculous. The man picked up his daughter, spun her in the air. She laughed. The sound was pure joy, untainted by the suffering around her. Too young to understand, too young to remember. They both hoped she would never remember these years, never carry the scars they carried. July was hot, genuinely hot. People complained about heat, then laughed at themselves for complaining. Heat was blessing. Heat was life. Heat meant crops growing, meant long days, meant hope. The gardens flourished. Corn grew tall. Beans produced pods. Squash spread across the ground with heavy fruit. For the first time in 2 years, abundance seemed possible, not guaranteed, but possible. But nature had taught them not to trust. On July 23rd, a hailstorm struck southern Indiana. Hail the size of eggs. It shredded crops, destroyed gardens, killed livestock. Families who had been preparing for harvest lost everything in 20 minutes. The storm passed, left devastation. People walked through destroyed fields in shock, corn beaten into the ground, beans stripped from vines, squash smashed. Months of work, all their hope, gone. The Eloy family was spared. The storm passed north of them, but they heard about it. Heard about families losing everything. The father thanked God. The mother said nothing. She had stopped thanking God, stopped blaming God. God was absent from this struggle. They were alone. They survived or died based on luck and effort. Nothing more, no divine plan, no greater purpose, just random chance and brutal nature. August brought the harvest. For those whose crops survived, it was a time of desperate work, gathering everything before weather could destroy it, before animals could take it, before anything else could go wrong. People worked dawn until dark, harvesting, preserving, storing, building supplies for the winter they knew was coming, because winter always came, and it came early, and it stayed late, and it tried to kill you. The young couple in Michigan harvested a reasonable crop, not abundant, but enough. Combined with the meat the man had preserved in careful rationing, they might have enough, might make it through. The woman calculated and recalculated, added numbers, divided portions, tried to make the math work. Her husband told her they would be fine. She wanted to believe him, but she had learned not to believe in fine. Fine was a luxury. Fine was an assumption they could not afford. The widower and his daughters harvested their garden methodically. The older daughter kept precise records, weight of every potato, count of every ear of corn, number of beans. She created an inventory. made a plan, calculated daily rations for each of them. Her father was impressed, told her so. She shrugged, said it was just practical. Someone had to do it. He realized she had become the leader of their family. Somewhere during these terrible years she had taken control. He was grateful and sad. No 17-year-old should have to be this responsible, this hard. This adult September came cool, cooler than it should be. People noticed, worried, hoped. They were imagining it, hoped it was just normal September weather. But they knew better. They had learned to read the signs, to feel the wrongness in the air. Winter was coming early again. The second winter in a row. The third overall in this nightmare cycle. And they were tired. So tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of surviving. Tired of being afraid. October brought the first snow. 6 weeks early. Heavy snow that blanketed everything. Buried the world in white. People watched from windows with dead eyes. They had known it was coming, had prepared as best they could, but knowing did not make it easier, did not make it less terrifying. They settled into their cabins, barred the doors, fed the fires, began the long dark wait. The psychology of the second winter was different from the first. The first had carried shock, disbelief, the hope that surely this would end. The second winter carried resignation, acceptance, the knowledge that this might never end, that they might die in this cold, that survival was not guaranteed no matter how hard they tried. This knowledge was heavier than the cold, heavier than the hunger. It pressed down on souls, crushed spirits, made people hollow. The young couple settled into routines. He maintained the fire. She cared for the baby. They rationed food strictly. 1 meal a day. Small portions. They talked less now. Conversation took energy, took hope. They existed side by side, parallel lives barely touching. The baby was their only connection, their only reason. Without her, they might have drifted apart entirely, might have retreated into individual isolation. But she needed both of them, so they stayed together, functioned as a unit, survived. In Illinois, the family that had fled south discovered that southern winter was still winter. Less severe than Michigan, but severe enough. Cold enough. Dangerous enough. The father realized they would need to go farther south next year. Kentucky, maybe. Tennessee. Somewhere winter was mild. Somewhere survival did not require such desperate measures, his wife agreed. The children were weakening. The youngest was sick. A cough that would not go away. A fever that came and went. They needed better conditions. Warmer weather, more food, or they would lose her. The widower and his daughters faced the second winter with grim efficiency. They had learned so much. How to ration perfectly. How to maintain minimal fire. How to trap in winter. How to make everything last. The older daughter ran the household. Her father followed orders. The younger daughter existed. That was all. She ate when told, slept when told, worked when told, but there was nothing behind her eyes. No personality, no emotion, no self. She had retreated so far inside that the widower wondered if she would ever come out. November was brutal. Temperatures far below normal. winds that never stopped, snow that fell constantly. People burned through firewood faster than anticipated, started burning furniture again. Cabin walls, anything wooden, anything that would burn. Heat was more important than shelter at a certain point. Better to freeze in an open cabin than freeze in a closed one. At least an open one gave you a chance to see death coming. Food became critical. Families ran low faster than expected. The cold required more calories. The body burned fuel trying to stay warm. People ate more, depleted stores more quickly. By mid-November, some families were already rationing desperately, making soup with water and a single potato, boiling bones multiple times to extract every bit of nutrition, eating things that would normally be considered inedible, tree bark, leather, anything that might contain some caloric value. A family 4 miles from the young couple knocked on their door in late November. A father with 2 sons. Their wife and mother had died in October. Pneumonia. They had no food left. Nothing. They were starving. The father asked for help. His sons stood behind him, thin, shaking, eyes too large in gaunt faces. The young man looked at his wife. She looked at the baby. They had enough food for themselves. Barely, not enough to share. The young man told them he was sorry. He had nothing to give. The father nodded, said he understood. They left. The young couple never saw them again, never learned what happened to them, preferred not to know. December brought darkness, literal and metaphorical. The days were so short, the nights so long. People sat in dark. Cabins, conserving candles, conserving lamp oil, conserving everything. The darkness was oppressive, heavy. It made time feel strange, distorted. Days blended together. You woke, ate a small amount, sat, slept, woke again. Was it day? Was it night? Did it matter? Time lost meaning when every moment was the same. Cold, dark, hungry, afraid. The young couple's baby got sick in early December. A fever. She cried constantly, would not nurse. The mother held her day and night, tried everything. Cold cloths, warm cloths, Arb's prayer. The fever broke after 3 days. The baby survived, but the mother did not recover emotionally. She stopped sleeping, watched the baby constantly, convinced that if she looked away, her daughter would die. The man tried to comfort her, told her the baby was fine. She would not listen, could not listen. Fear had taken hold. Rational thought had fled. Christmas came. No celebration, no acknowledgement. It was just another day. Cold, dark, hungry, the young. Man had carved another toy for his daughter. A small horse. He gave it to her on Christmas morning. She grabbed it, put it in her mouth. Too young to play properly, too young to understand. His wife smiled weakly, told him it was beautiful, then went back to staring at the baby. The man sat by the fire, wondered how much longer they could do this, wondered if survival was worth the cost, then felt guilty for wondering. The Illinois family's youngest child died on December 30th. The cough had gotten worse. The fever never broke. She was 6 years old. They wrapped her in a blanket, laid her in the snow, marked the spot. The mother did not cry. She had no tears left. The father built a small cross. The other children stood silently. They had learned not to show emotion. Emotion was weakness. Weakness was dangerous. The family went back inside. Life continued, because what else could they do? Stop living because one of them had died. Everyone was dying, slowly, quickly, inevitably. January 1837 was the coldest month in living memory. Temperatures dropped to levels that should not be possible, that could not be survived. People huddled by fires, wore every piece of clothing, burned everything that could burn. And still the cold found them, reached through walls, through clothes, through skin, into bones, into souls. Cold that felt sentient, malevolent, actively trying to kill. The widower in Ohio burned his bed in January, then the girl's bed. They slept on the floor near the fire, all three together, sharing body heat, sharing blankets. The older daughter protested burning the beds, said they would need them later. Her father said later did not matter if they froze tonight. She understood, helped him break up the bed frames, fed them to the fire, watched the wood burn, wondered what they would burn next, what they would sacrifice tomorrow. People stopped moving unless necessary. Movement required calories, burned energy. Energy was precious, could not be wasted. Families sat still for hours, days, only moving to tend fire, to prepare food, to use the chamber pot. Everything else was eliminated. Conversation, work, activity, all gone, replaced by stillness, by conservation, by the desperate attempt to make their bodies last until spring. Food was running out everywhere. People were starving, really starving. The body consuming itself, muscle wasting, organs beginning to fail. People became skeletal, their faces gaunt, eyes sunken, teeth loose, hair falling out. The physical signs of advanced starvation. Some went mad. The hunger drove them insane. They talked to people who were not there, saw things that did not exist, lost touch with reality. Others became violent, desperate, dangerous. The young man in Michigan was starving himself to keep his wife and daughter fed. He ate almost nothing, claimed he was not hungry. His wife knew what he was doing, begged him to eat. He refused, said she needed strength to nurse. She needed food to make milk. The baby needed milk to survive. Therefore, the baby and wife ate. He did not. The math was simple, brutal, but simple. He was dying. They both knew it. Neither spoke of it, because speaking made it real, made it unbearable. February brought no relief, just more cold, more hunger, more death. Bodies were found frozen in cabins. Entire families sometimes. They had run out of firewood, run out of food, run out of strength. They had simply stopped, laid down, let the cold take them. It was easier than continuing, easier than fighting every single day with no end in sight. Some people judged them, called them weak. Others understood, envied them even, because at least their suffering was over. The young couple reached their breaking point in late February. They had no food left. Nothing. The man was too weak to hunt, too weak to trap, too weak to move. His wife was still nursing, but her milk was almost gone. The baby cried constantly, starving, dying. They sat together, held each other, held their daughter, waited for the end. They did not speak, did not cry, did not pray. They had moved beyond all that. They simply existed in the moment, waiting for it to be over. Then a neighbor appeared. The same neighbor who had offered to take them south. He had returned. His sister's farm had been no better. He had come back to his land, to his cabin. He knocked on their door. The young man opened it, could barely stand. The neighbor saw the situation immediately, went to his wagon, brought back food, salt pork, cornmeal, dried beans. Not much, but something. He told them he would check on them weekly, share what he had. The young man tried to thank him, could not find words. The neighbor nodded, said they were neighbors. That was enough. He left. The food saved them. They rationed it carefully, made it last. The wife's milk returned. The baby stopped crying, started nursing properly. The man ate small amounts, regained some strength. Not much, but enough to function, enough to survive. They knew they owed their lives to the neighbor, knew they could never repay him, but they would try. Someday, if they lived that long. March finally brought real thaw. Not false hope this time, real warmth, sustained warmth. Snow melted, ice broke up on rivers, mud appeared everywhere. Glorious mud. People emerged from cabins, looked around, counted who was left. So many were gone, dead or fled. The survivors looked at each other with hollow eyes. They had made it, somehow, through a second winter, through horror that should not be survivable. They had made it, but at what cost? Wait until you hear about the third winter. Asterisk. Spring 1837 arrived broken, not absent like before, but damaged, wounded, like nature itself was exhausted from the struggle. The warmth came, but felt fragile, tentative, as if it might retreat at any moment. People planted again, because they had to, because there was no alternative. But the hope that had sustained them through previous plantings was gone, replaced by grim determination, by obligation, by the mechanical act of putting seeds in ground without believing anything good would come from it. The young couple in Michigan planted their field. The man was skeletal now. His body had not recovered from February, probably never would. But he moved through the motions, plowing, planting. His wife helped, the baby on her back, growing despite everything, thriving in ways that defied logic. Children were resilient, more resilient than adults. She embodied hope even when her parents had none. They worked for her, survived for her, continued for her. The neighbor who had saved them helped with planting. He had lost his own family in the first winter, wife and 2 daughters. He never spoke of them, never explained what happened, but the grief lived in his eyes, in his movements, in the way he threw himself into work. Helping others was how he survived. how he found meaning. The young couple became his purpose, his reason to continue. He checked on them weekly, shared food when he had extra, fixed things around their cabin, asked for nothing in return. In Illinois, the family that had lost their youngest daughter planted in silence. The mother moved mechanically, planting, watering, weeding, but her spirit was elsewhere, with her dead child, with the life they should have had. The father tried to engage her. She responded in single words. Yes, no, maybe. Their remaining children watched their parents fracture, watched the marriage dissolve under the weight of grief. The oldest boy, now 9, took on more responsibility, helped his father, tried to shield his younger siblings, became an adult too soon. Like everyone else, the widower in Ohio planted, with his older daughter, just the two of them. The younger daughter had stopped functioning entirely. She sat in the cabin, stared at walls, did not speak, did not respond, had retreated so far inside herself that she was unreachable. They had tried everything, talking to her, holding her, leaving her alone. Nothing worked. She was alive but not living, present but absent. The older daughter cried about it sometimes, late at night, when she thought no one could hear. Her father heard, said nothing, because what could he say? They were all broken. Some breaks just showed more than others. April brought adequate weather. Not warm, not cold, just neutral. The crops grew slowly, struggling. The soil was depleted after years of abnormal cold. Nutrients locked away. The plants were pale, weak, but growing. People tended them obsessively, talked to them, prayed over them, begged them to thrive. These gardens represented final chances, last hopes. If the crops failed this year, there would be no next year, no more attempts. This was it. May arrived cooler than normal, not catastrophically cold, but not warm either. The growing season was compromised again, shortened. Plants that needed 100 days to mature might only get 80, maybe less. People did what they could, fertilized with anything available. Manure, ash, compost, watered constantly. Protected seedlings from cold nights, fought for every plant, every stalk, every leaf. Communities barely existed now. The population had dropped so dramatically that calling them communities felt generous. Collections of isolated families, strangers occupying the same general area. No cooperation, no shared resources, no collective identity, just individuals fighting separate battles. The social structures that had once defined frontier life were dead, replaced by atomization, by loneliness, by the understanding that in the end everyone dies alone. The young couple saw other people rarely. Weeks would pass without contact. When they did encounter neighbors, the interactions were brief, uncomfortable. No one wanted to share information about food stores, about successes or failures, about anything that might reveal vulnerability. Trust was gone. Community was gone. Only wariness remained. Eyes that assessed whether you were threat or opportunity. Calculations about whether helping you would benefit them. Nothing was given freely anymore. Everything had price. June brought better weather. Finally, real warmth. Sustained warmth. The crops responded. Grew with vigor they had lacked before. Corn shot up. Beans produced. Squash spread. For the first time in 3 years, gardens looked healthy, looked productive, looked like they might actually yield harvests. People allowed themselves to feel something close to hope, not real hope. That was too dangerous, but cautious optimism. The possibility that maybe, possibly, they might have enough food. The young man hunted successfully in June. Deer were abundant again. The population had recovered, or perhaps the human hunters had diminished enough that game was plentiful. He killed 2 deer in 3 weeks. They smoked the meat, stored it, carefully added it to their supplies. The wife calculated, recalculated. If the garden produced even half of what it promised, combined with the smoked meat, careful rationing, they would make it. Would survive another winter. The math finally worked. But the wife had learnt not to trust good fortune. She waited for disaster, for the frost, the hail, the blight. Something would go wrong. Something always went wrong. She checked the garden multiple times daily, examined every plant, looked for signs of disease, of insect damage, of anything that might threaten their harvest. Her husband told her to relax. She could not. Relaxing felt like inviting catastrophe. Vigilance was all. That kept them safe. She believed that. Needed to believe that. Because if vigilance did not matter, then nothing they did mattered. And that was too terrifying to accept. July was hot, scorching, the kind of heat that in normal times would be complained about. But these were not normal times. Heat meant growth, meant long days, meant crops maturing. People celebrated heat, worked in it without complaint. Sweat was blessing. Discomfort was price of survival. They paid it gladly. The gardens flourished. Corn grew tall, over 6 feet. Tassels appeared. Ears formed. Beans hung heavy on vines. Squash fruit swelled. It looked like abundance, like salvation. The Illinois family's garden exceeded expectations. They would have enough, more than enough. The father felt vindicated again. They had survived, had made the right choices, had protected their family. His wife said nothing. She had learned that survival was temporary, that next year would bring new challenges, new threats, new opportunities for loss. The dead daughter haunted her, would always haunt her. Success. Today did not erase yesterday's failures, did not bring back what was lost. The widower and his older daughter harvested the first. Vegetables in late July, radishes, lettuce, early peas. They ate fresh food for the first time in months. The taste was overwhelming, sharp, vibrant, alive. The older daughter cried while eating. Her father pretended not to notice. They offered food to the younger daughter. She took it, chewed mechanically, swallowed. No change in expression, no recognition of the gift they were giving her. She was gone. The person she had been was dead. This shell remained. They would care for it, protect it. But they had accepted that their family was now too. People. Not 3. August brought the main harvest. People worked frantically, gathering everything, storing everything, preserving everything. This harvest represented life, represented hope, represented the possibility of future they could not afford to lose any of it. Every ear of corn mattered, every bean, every squash. They worked dawn to dusk, exhausting themselves, not caring. This was too important to spare effort. The young couple harvested more food than they had seen in 3 years. Corn beans, squash, combined with the smoked venison, they had enough. Actually enough. Not barely enough. Not maybe enough. But truly enough. They stood in their cabin looking at the stores. The wife started laughing, then crying, then laughing again. The man held her. They had made it, had survived, had beaten the odds. Their daughter played at their feet, oblivious, perfect. A miracle they did not deserve, but received anyway. The neighbor helped them preserve food, showed them techniques for long-term storage, how to keep corn dry, how to prevent mold, how to protect against rodents. He had learned so much in his years on the frontier. Before the cold years he had been successful, prosperous even. Now he was just surviving, like everyone else. But he remembered the old knowledge, the techniques that worked. He shared them freely, asked nothing in return. The young couple offered to pay him, with food, with labor. He refused, said neighbors helped. Neighbors, even though neighbors barely existed anymore. Even though community was dead, he held on to the old ways, the old values. It was how he honored his dead family. September arrived cool. People tensed, waited for the cold, for winter to come early again, for the pattern to repeat, but it did not. September stayed temperate, pleasant even. Leaves changed color on schedule. Geese flew south at the normal time. Nature seemed to be remembering how to be normal, how to follow the rhythms that had existed for millennia. People did not trust it, could not trust it, but they noticed, hoped, very carefully hoped. October brought the first frost, right on schedule. Normal frost, expected frost, not the killing freeze of previous years, just regular autumn cold. Farmers finished their harvests, stored the last vegetables, prepared for winter. But this preparation felt different, less desperate, less terrified. They had food, real food, enough food. Winter was coming, but it was normal winter, survivable winter. They could do this. The young family brought in their last harvest in mid-October, filled their cabin with stores. The man built additional storage, racks for corn, bins for potatoes, hooks for smoked meat. The cabin was crowded now, full of food, full of life, full of hope. His wife walked around touching everything, making sure it was real. Not a dream, not delusion, actually real. She counted, recounted. The numbers worked. They would eat this winter, would eat well even. The relief was almost unbearable. The Illinois family stored their harvests methodically. The father built a proper root cellar, dug into a hillside, lined with stone, cool and dry, perfect for storage. He placed potatoes carefully, carrots, turnips, everything that would keep. The corn hung from rafters. the beans dried in bags, the squash-lined shelves. It looked like prosperity, like success. He allowed himself to feel proud. His wife did not share the feeling. She looked at the food and thought only of their dead daughter, of how she would never eat any of it. The father tried to reach her, tried to pull her back to the living. She would not come. Grief had her, would always have her. The widower and his older daughter stored their harvest efficiently. They had learned to waste nothing, use every space, maximize every resource. The cabin was full, the root cellar was full. They had succeeded. Against all odds, against impossible circumstances. Two people, one of them barely 17, had survived and built security for the coming winter. The older daughter allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, of pride, then went back to work. There was always more work, always more preparation, always more to do. November arrived cold, but not catastrophically so. Normal cold, expected cold. The kind that could be managed with sufficient firewood and food. People settled into winter routines. But these routines were different from previous years. There was enough food, enough fuel, enough security. Meals were adequate, not abundant, but adequate. No one was starving. No one was burning furniture. No one was making desperate choices. It felt surreal, like they had forgotten what normal winter felt like, how survivable it was supposed to be. The young couple's cabin was warm. The man had cut plenty of firewood, more than enough. They burned it generously, keeping the space actually warm, not just barely above freezing, actually comfortable. They ate 2 meals a day, sometimes 3. The baby was thriving, walking now, talking, saying simple words. Mama, Dada, more. She was growing into a person, a personality, happy, curious, untroubled. She remembered nothing of the previous winters, was too young. It was blessing. The parents were grateful. Grateful she would not carry the scars they carried. Christmas came. The young couple celebrated. The man carved more toys for his daughter. A whole set now. Horse, dull, simple blocks. The wife cooked a special meal, used extra supplies, made bread, made stew with vegetables. It felt extravagant, wasteful even. But they did it anyway, because they could, because they had survived, because they deserved one day of abundance, one day of joy. The neighbor joined them. They ate together, talked, laughed even. It felt foreign, strange, but good. So good, though. Illinois' family marked Christmas quietly. The father suggested they celebrate, make a special meal. The mother refused, said she could not celebrate when her daughter was dead. The father did not push, let it go. The children received no gifts, no special food, no acknowledgement, just another day. They did not complain, did not expect anything different. Childhood joy had died years ago. They were little adults now, serious, pragmatic, damaged. The widower and his older daughter observed Christmas with quiet reflection. They made a slightly larger meal, said prayers, remembered the wife and mother who was gone, remembered the sister and daughter who was gone in a different way. The younger daughter sat with them, ate when prompted, otherwise unresponsive. They had given up trying to reach her, had accepted this was who she was now. They would care for her as long as necessary, forever if needed, but they no longer expected recovery, no longer hoped for her return. She was gone. They mourned her. While she still lived, January 1838 arrived cold. But normal cold, the kind that belonged in January, the kind that was manageable. People burned firewood steadily but not desperately, ate food regularly but not extravagantly, lived, actually lived, not just survived. There was difference. Survival was mechanical, was existing without living. Living was having moments beyond mere existence, moments of comfort, of satisfaction, of something approaching contentment. People had not lived in 3 years. Now they remembered what it felt like. The young man sat by the fire one January evening, his wife beside him, their daughter asleep. Between them, he looked around the cabin, saw the food stores, felt the warmth, heard his family breathing. He started crying. Quietly, his wife took his hand, asked what was wrong. He said nothing was wrong. Everything was right. For the first time in 3 years, everything was actually right. They were warm, fed, together, alive. It felt like miracle, like grace, like something they had not earned, but received anyway. February brought storms, heavy snow, strong winds, but the cabin was warm. The food was adequate. The family was safe. The storms raged outside. Inside there was peace. The baby played with her toys. The mother sewed. The father carved. They existed in domestic tranquility. It felt surreal, impossible, like any moment they would wake up and discover it was dream, that they were actually still in the second winter. Still starving, still freezing, still dying. But they did not wake up, because it was real. The nightmare was ending, finally, actually ending. The Illinois family endured February without crisis. They had enough of everything, enough food, enough fuel, enough supplies. The physical needs were met, but the emotional damage remained. The mother barely spoke, spent hours staring at nothing. The father tried to engage her. She would not engage. The children adapted, learned to parent themselves, the older boy especially. He took care of his younger siblings, made sure they were fed, dressed, safe. The father was grateful and heartbroken. No 9-year-old should have to be so responsible, but gratitude outweighed. Heartbreak. The family functioned. That was enough. The widower and his daughters survived February too easily. After 3 years of desperate struggle, normal winter felt trivial. They had so much food, so much fuel, so much security. The older daughter relaxed slightly, not much, but slightly, allowed herself to believe they would make it, would survive, would see spring. Her father noticed the change, was glad. She deserved peace, deserved to feel safe, even if that safety was temporary, even if next year brought new challenges. She deserved this moment. March arrived with thaw. Real thaw, permanent thaw. Spring was coming. Not false hope this time, not temporary reprieve. Actual spring, the kind that arrived and stayed. The kind that brought warmth and life and renewal. Snow melted rapidly. Rivers broke up. Birds returned. The world came back to life. People emerged from cabins, looked around, saw their neighbors, saw who had survived, who had made it through. The numbers were shocking. So few left. So many gone. The young couple walked their property in early March, looked at the field they would plant, looked at the cabin they had defended, looked at each other. They had survived, had kept their daughter alive, had made it through 3 winters that should have killed them. They did not speak. Words were insufficient. They simply stood together, holding hands, watching their daughter chase the neighbor's dog through melting snow, laughing, perfect, untouched by the horror. Her parents had endured. They had protected her from it, had given her life and safety and future. It was enough. It had to be enough. The worst was over. The 3 winters that seemed endless had ended. Spring had returned. Life had returned. Hope had returned. But the cost had been staggering. The scars ran deep. The survivors would carry the memories forever, would wake in the night sometimes, sweating, terrified, remembering the cold, the hunger, the fear. They would never fully recover, never fully heal, but they had survived, and survival meant possibility, meant future, meant that maybe, just maybe, they could build something good from the ashes of horror. Spring 1838 arrived like a resurrection, not the tentative half-springs of previous years, but full, complete, undeniable. March brought warmth that stayed. April exploded with growth. The earth seemed desperate to make up for lost time. Grass grew with unusual vigor. Trees budded aggressively. Wildflowers carpeted fields in waves of color. It was as if nature itself was apologizing, compensating, trying to heal the wounds it had inflicted. Survivors emerged from their cabins, slowly, blinking in bright sunlight, disoriented, like people waking from long nightmares. They looked at each other with hollow eyes, eyes that had seen too much, known too much suffering. They were changed, fundamentally, irreversibly. The people who had entered the winter of 1835 were dead. These were different people, harder, older, damaged in ways that would never fully heal. The young couple in Michigan stood in their doorway watching spring arrive. The man was thin still. His body had not recovered the weight lost during the starving times. Probably never would. His hair had gone partially grey. He was 25 but looked 40. His wife was 23. She looked older, lines around her eyes, around her mouth, marks of worry, of fear, of 3 years spent on the edge of death. Their daughter was almost 2 now, perfect, unblemished, the only innocent thing left in their world. They planted their field in April. The work felt different this year. Not desperate, not terrified, just work, normal work, the kind farmers had done for thousands of years. Put seeds in ground, trust earth to do its part. The simplicity was jarring. They had forgotten farming could be simple, could be routine, could be anything other than life or death struggle. The man worked slowly, his body still weak. The neighbor helped. He always helped. They'd become part of their family in ways that transcended blood. The field grew beautifully. The corn shut up, strong, healthy, dark green. The kind of growth they had not seen in years. The beans climbed vigorously. The squash spread rapidly. It looked like abundance, like prosperity, like the future they had imagined when they first claimed this land, before the cold, before the suffering, before they learned how fragile everything was. The wife watched the garden grow and felt nothing. No joy, no satisfaction, no relief. The capacity for positive emotion had been burned out of her. She was functional, capable, but hollow, empty of everything except mechanical competence. In Illinois, the family that had lost their daughter tried to rebuild. The father threw himself into work, expanded his fields, built new structures, kept busy constantly. Movement meant not thinking, not remembering, not grieving. His wife did the opposite. She stopped moving, sat for hours, staring at nothing. The children navigated between these extremes, tried to be invisible, tried not to cause problems, tried to hold together a family that was fragmenting. The older boy carried the weight. He was 10 now, too young for such responsibility. But responsibility did not care about age. Someone had to hold things together. He did it because no one else would. The widower in Ohio and his older daughter planted their field together, just the two of them. The younger daughter remained in the cabin, unresponsive, present but absent. They had tried everything to reach her. Doctors when they could afford them, medicines, prayers, time. Nothing worked. She was locked inside herself, trapped in whatever mental prison the winters had created. They cared for her, fed her, kept her clean, but they had stopped hoping for recovery. Hope was too expensive, too painful when it failed. Better to accept reality. She was gone. They would tend her shell for as long as necessary. Other families across the frontier faced similar struggles. The physical danger had passed. Food was available. Weather was normal, but the psychological damage remained. People suffered from what we would now recognize as severe trauma, depression, anxiety, what was then called melancholy or nervous. Exhaustion. They startled easily, had nightmares, struggled with crowds, with noise, with anything that reminded them of the hard years. Many never fully recovered, carried the scars until death. Communities began to reform, slowly, hesitantly. People who had isolated for survival started reaching out again, started talking to neighbors, started attending church, started rebuilding the social structures that had dissolved. But it was different now. The easy trust was gone. The assumption of mutual aid was gone. People helped each other, but warily, with limits, with boundaries. The innocence of early frontier community had died, been replaced by something more cautious, more cynical, more realistic. A traveling minister came through Michigan territory in May, held revival meetings, promised salvation, promised explanation for the suffering, promised that God had a plan. Some people came, desperate for meaning, desperate to believe their suffering had purpose. The young couple attended once, listened to the minister talk about divine testing, about Job, about how suffering brought people closer to God. The wife stood up, walked out. Her husband followed. They never went back. If God had done this to them, then they wanted nothing to do with God. If God had not done this, then he was powerless to prevent it. Either way, church offered nothing they needed. Others found comfort in religion, clung to faith as the only thing that made sense of senselessness, believed that heaven waited, that their dead children were safe, that suffering on earth was temporary, that eternity would compensate for temporal pain. The young couple did not judge them. Whatever got you through was valid, but they could not share that faith, had lost it somewhere in the second winter, when their daughter was dying and prayers went unanswered, when they realized they were alone, truly alone. Number. God, no providence. Just luck and effort and random chance. Summer brought abundance. The crops matured perfectly. The harvest was extraordinary. People gathered more food than they had seen in 5 years. Barns filled, root cellars filled, cabins filled. It was almost obscene. This wealth after such poverty, this abundance after such scarcity. Some people hoarded reflexively, stored food they would never eat, could not stop gathering, could not trust that next year would also be good. The trauma of scarcity had rewired their brains, made them incapable of feeling secure no matter how much they had. The young couple harvested their field in August. The yield was massive, more than they could possibly use. They sold some, traded some, gave some away, kept plenty for themselves. Their stores were overflowing. The man built additional storage. The wife watched him work, felt disconnected, like she was observing someone else's life. She went through motions, cared for their daughter, cooked, cleaned, did everything a wife and mother should do, but felt nothing, was numb, had been numb since February of the second winter. She wondered if she would ever feel again, or if this numbness was permanent, the price of survival. In Illinois, the abundant harvest did not heal the broken family. The father worked obsessively, made more money than they needed, bought things, built things, kept moving. The mother remained withdrawn, lost in grief. The children adapted, learned to function without real parenting, became independent too soon. The family existed together but separately, parallel lives in the same space, not connected, not whole, just adjacent. The widower and his older daughter harvested successfully. Their fields produced well. They had security for the coming winter. The older daughter was 18 now. An adult, she had offers of marriage. Young men who saw her competence, her strength, her capability. She refused them all, said she could not leave her father, could not leave her sister, could not abandon her responsibilities. Her father told her to go, to live her life. She refused. They both knew why. She had lost too much already, could not risk caring about anyone new, could not risk more loss. Better to stay, to maintain. to exist in the known pain rather than risk unknown happiness that might become pain. New settlers began arriving in late 1838. People from the east who had heard land was cheap, who did not know what had happened, who saw opportunity in the depleted population. The survivors looked at them with mixed feelings, part resentment. These newcomers had not suffered, had not earned their place. Part relief. New people meant community could rebuild, meant the frontier would not die completely. Part pitied, because the newcomers were so innocent, so hopeful, so unaware of how quickly everything could collapse. A young family moved in near the young couple in September, fresh from Pennsylvania, full of dreams. The man introduced himself, talked about his plans, about the farm he would build, about the future he saw. The young couple listened politely, said nothing about the previous years. What could they say? How could they explain? The newcomers would learn, or they would not. Either way, it was not the survivors' responsibility to shatter their illusions, let them have their hope, while it lasted. The physical scars were obvious. People were thinner, weaker. Many had lost teeth from malnutrition, had hair that had gone white or fallen out, had skin that showed the effects of vitamin deficiency, scurvy, rickets. Conditions that should have been rare were common. Some people recovered physically. Others carried permanent damage, weakened hearts, damaged lungs, bodies that had been pushed beyond sustainable limits and never fully healed. But the psychological scars went deeper. The young wife woke screaming. Sometimes nightmares of her daughter dying, of snow falling in July, of cold that would not end. Her husband held her, said nothing, because what could he say? He had his own nightmares, his own fears. They did not discuss them, did not process them, just carried them, separately, together. The weight never lessened, only became familiar, became part of who they were now. The Illinois mother never recovered. She existed but did not live, went through motions but found no joy, no peace, no release from grief. Her family tried to reach her. She was unreachable. Eventually, they stopped trying, accepted that she was gone even though her body remained. The father took over her duties, cooked, cleaned, cared for the children, worked the farm, did everything. She sat, stared, existed. It was slow death. Everyone knew it. No one could stop it. She would live another decade, empty, broken, a ghost. In her own life, some survivors found ways forward, created new lives from the ruins of the old. The widower eventually remarried, a widow from the next county. She had lost her husband and son in the first winter. They married not from love, but from practicality, from loneliness, from the need to not be alone. It was not romantic, but it worked. They built a life together, quiet, stable, functional. His older daughter never married, stayed home, cared for her sister, became essential to the household, found purpose in duty, in responsibility, in maintaining. She never seemed unhappy, but she never seemed happy either. Just existed in the middle, neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. Just present, the young couple stayed together, raised their daughter, had 2 more children in the years after, built a successful farm. From the outside they looked normal, prosperous even, but between them was distance, a gulf created by 3 years of shared trauma that they could never fully bridge. They cared for each other, were faithful, were good parents. But the passionate young couple who had claimed the land in 1835 was gone, replaced by 2 damaged people doing their best. It was enough. Had to be enough. They did not expect happiness, did not seek joy, just sought stability, safety, security, found those things, made a life from them. By 1840, the population had stabilized. Some areas had recovered partially, others remained sparsely populated. The demographic impact was significant. Thousands had died. Thousands more had fled. The westward expansion had been set back years. Territories that should have achieved statehood remained territories. The ambitious growth projections of the early 1830s were abandoned. Reality had intruded, shown the limits of human ambition, of manifest destiny, of the belief that the frontier was there for the taking. Nature had reminded everyone who was really in control. The survivors aged rapidly. The young man in Michigan was 30 in 1840, looked 50. His body was worn out from the hard years. He would die at 45. Heart failure. His body simply gave out. Used up. Exhausted. His wife outlived him by 20 years. Raised their 3 children. Alone. Never remarried. Never spoke of the hard years. Her children knew something had happened. Could see it in her eyes, in her reactions to cold, to hunger, to waste. But she never explained, never wanted them to know, wanted them innocent, untouched, protected from the knowledge of how bad things could get. The records from this period are sparse. Many families did not keep records, could not read or write, or chose not to document what had happened. The census of 1840 shows dramatic population decline in the affected territories. But the numbers tell only part of the story, cannot capture the psychological damage, the broken families, the lost potential, the dreams that died, the innocence that was shattered. Those losses are not recorded, not documented, not preserved. But they were real, were significant, were the true cost of the winters that would not end. Some survivors tried to document what happened, wrote letters to relatives back east, kept journals, created records. But even as they wrote, they sensed their accounts would be doubted, would be dismissed as exaggeration, as hysteria, as the ramblings of traumatized minds. How could they explain what it felt like to watch your child starve? To burn your furniture for warmth? To consider actions that in normal times would be unthinkable? Words were inadequate. Experience was untranslatable. They wrote anyway, because someone needed to remember, someone needed to bear witness, even if no one believed them. The young man in Michigan wrote to his brother in Ohio in 1840, described what they had endured. His brother wrote back, said surely it had not been that bad, said the human mind exaggerated traumatic memories. The young man never wrote to him again, did not have energy to convince anyone, to defend his experience, to prove his suffering. He knew what had happened. His wife knew. Their neighbor knew. That was enough. The rest of the world could believe what it wanted, and mostly, the world chose not to believe, chose to minimize, chose to forget. Because the story of the three winters did not fit the narrative America wanted to tell itself. The narrative of progress, of conquest, of manifest destiny, of inevitable triumph. The winters suggested that nature was more powerful than human. That civilization was fragile, that confidence was dangerous. These were not popular messages, not messages the growing nation wanted to hear. So they were ignored, dismissed, forgotten, buried under more palatable stories of frontier heroism, of triumph over adversity, of the inevitable march of progress. But the survivors remembered, carried the memories until death. Some passed stories to their children. Most did not. Most wanted to protect the next generation, wanted them unburdened. The children sensed something anyway, saw the scars, the fears, the behaviors that made no sense unless you knew what came before. They asked questions, got vague answers, eventually stopped asking. The silence grew. The stories faded. The memories died with those who carried them. Wait until you hear how thoroughly this was erased. The forgetting began almost immediately, even while survivors still lived, even while the scars were fresh. The erasure was not accidental, it was not natural memory decay. It was deliberate, systematic, orchestrated by people who had very good reasons to want these winters forgotten. People with money, with power, with futures that depended on frontier land continuing to seem attractive, continuing to seem profitable, continuing to draw settlers and investment. Land speculators had the most to lose. They had purchased millions of acres across the affected territories, paid pennies per acre, expected to sell for dollars. Their entire business model depended on continued westward migration, on families believing the frontier offered opportunity, prosperity, future. Stories of 3 consecutive winters of mass death were bad for business, very bad. So the speculators acted, quickly, decisively, with coordinated purpose. Eastern newspapers began refusing letters from survivors. Editors received instructions, guidance, sometimes bribes. Do not publish accounts from the territories. Do not run stories about crop failures, about deaths, about settlements failing. Focus on success. Stories on prosperity, on opportunity. A newspaper in Philadelphia received a letter in 1839 from a Michigan survivor. Detailed account of the 3 winters, the suffering, the deaths, the horror. The editor filed it away, never published it. Years later asked why. He explained simply, no one wanted to read depressing stories. People wanted hope, wanted optimism, wanted to believe in American progress. His job was to give them what they wanted. Territorial governments actively suppressed information. Official reports downplayed casualty numbers, listed families who had disappeared as relocated rather than dead or missing. Death certificates were not issued for people who died isolated on homesteads. If no one reported the death officially, then officially it did not happen. Population records were adjusted, made to show growth rather than decline. The manipulation was not subtle, but it was effective. Future historians looking at official records would see steady population growth, would see successful territorial expansion, would see nothing that suggested catastrophe. Land companies published promotional materials in 1839 and 1840, glossy brochures, detailed descriptions of fertile soil, mild climate, abundant opportunity. They made no mention of the previous years, no acknowledgement of hardship, no warning of risks. New settlers arrived with these brochures, with these promises, found a very different reality. By then, the land companies had their money. The deception had served its purpose. The newcomers were stuck, had to make the best of it, or abandon their investment and flee. Most stayed, tried to succeed. Never knew they had been deliberately misled. A land office clerk in Michigan Territory received orders in 1839. Adjust the records. Families who had disappeared needed to be listed as relocated to other territories. Deaths needed to be minimized. The numbers needed to show growth, success, progress. He complied. His job depended on it. His family depended on it. He made the changes, falsified documents, erased people from existence. Years later, guilt-ridden, he confessed to his wife, told her what he had done. She told him he had no choice. Everyone had to survive somehow. He accepted this, but the guilt never left. He carried it until death, never told anyone else, never made it right. Just carried the weight of erasing thousands of people to protect property values. Railroad companies were equally invested in suppressing the truth. Their business plans required population growth in the territories, required towns, commerce, customers. Empty land was worthless. They needed settlers, needed them desperately. Stories of mass death were obstacles, barriers to profit. So they acted, funded newspapers that told the right stories, hired writers to create promotional content, paid for testimonials from satisfied settlers, built a narrative of success and opportunity that bore little resemblance to reality. The suppression extended to personal correspondence, letters from survivors to relatives. Back east were sometimes intercepted, lost, destroyed. Postal clerks received instructions. Letters containing certain content should not reach their destinations, should disappear. It was not official policy, not written down anywhere, but it happened regularly, systematically. Survivors wrote letters describing their experiences. Melt them. They never arrived. The relatives back east never learned the truth, continued to believe the promotional literature, continued to encourage others to move west. The cycle continued. Churches participated in the suppression, not overtly, not deliberately, perhaps, but they promoted a narrative that made the hard years easier to ignore. Suffering was divine testing. Those who died were called to heaven. Those who survived were blessed. This framing made the catastrophe seem like individual, spiritual journey rather than systemic climate disaster. Made it about personal faith rather than policy failure. Made it easier to move forward without asking difficult questions, without assigning blame, without demanding accountability. The survivors themselves often did not speak about their experiences. Many were deeply traumatized, could not articulate what had happened. The words did not exist. The concepts did not exist. Post-traumatic stress disorder would not be named. For another century, They just knew they could not talk about it, could not revisit it, could not make others understand. So they stayed silent, kept the memories locked inside. The silence was mistaken for acceptance, for healing, for moving on. It was none of these things. It was survival mechanism. It was protective barrier. It was the only way they could continue functioning. Others faced social pressure to remain silent. Communities wanted to move forward, wanted to rebuild, wanted to forget. People who dwelt on the hard years were seen as weak, as complainers, as obstacles to progress. A woman in Illinois tried to talk about losing her daughter, about the starvation, about the cold. Her neighbors told her to stop living in the past, to focus on the future, to be grateful for what she had. She stopped talking, but the memories did not stop. They never stopped. She just carried them alone, in silence, until they consumed her. Some survivors feared judgment for the choices they had made, for the actions they had taken to survive. Better not to speak of those years at all than to risk revealing what they had done, what lines they had crossed, what boundaries they had violated. Silence protected them, protected their reputations, protected their ability to be seen as respectable members of society. The price was isolation, loneliness, the inability to process trauma, but the alternative seemed worse. So they chose silence. The scientific community of the era struggled to explain the phenomenon. Without modern climate science, they lacked frameworks for understanding. Some suggested it was localized, exaggerated, not as severe as reported. Others proposed natural cycles, temporary aberrations, nothing to worry about long term. A few recognized it as significant climate event, but their voices were minority, were drowned out by those who preferred simpler explanations, who preferred not to see pattern, not to acknowledge that this could happen again. Meteorological records from the period are incomplete. Weather stations were sparse. Record keeping was inconsistent. The data that exists shows temperature anomalies, shows unusual patterns, but gaps in the record allow for interpretation, allow for doubt, allow for dismissal. Later research, looking at the fragmentary data, could conclude it was not that bad, could argue the survivors exaggerated, could minimize the catastrophe. The incomplete record became excuse for incomplete acknowledgement. By 1850, just 12 years after the final winter ended, the 3 winters were rarely mentioned. Textbooks focused on westward expansion, on Oregon Trail, on Gold Rush, on the exciting narrative of American growth. The dark years from 1836 to 1838 were footnote at best. More often, they were completely absent. A generation of children learned American history without knowing thousands had died in the supposedly empty territories, without knowing their parents or grandparents had survived horror. The erasure was nearly complete. The Civil War cemented the forgetting. After 1861, the nation had new trauma, new deaths, new catastrophe to process. The frontier winters seemed distant, irrelevant. Why dwell on old suffering when new suffering was everywhere? The few survivors who tried to tell their stories found no audience, found a nation consumed by present crisis. Unwilling to hear about past pain, they gave up, accepted that their experience would die with them, that no one would remember, that No one cared. The American mythology of the frontier required triumph, required success, required the narrative of bold pioneers conquering wilderness, building civilization, creating something from nothing. The Three Winters did not fit this mythology, could not be incorporated, so they were excluded. The myth was more important than history. The story was more important than truth. America needed heroes, needed victories, needed to believe in manifest destiny, needed to believe that will and work were enough, that nature could be tamed, that progress was inevitable. The erasure served another purpose. It protected those in power, politicians who had encouraged westward expansion, who had promoted territorial development, who had promised safety and opportunity. Acknowledging the winters meant acknowledging failure, meant admitting they had sent people into danger, had promised what they could not deliver, had prioritized expansion over safety. This admission was politically unacceptable, so the winters were forgotten. And the politicians continued promoting westward movement, continued making promises, continued prioritizing growth over caution. Survivors who tried to speak faced ridicule, disbelief, accusations of exaggeration, of hysteria, of attention-seeking. The young man in Michigan attempted to tell his story to a traveling writer in 1845. The writer listened politely, then suggested perhaps the cold had not been quite as severe as remembered. Perhaps trauma had distorted memory. Perhaps things had been difficult but not impossible. The young man stopped talking mid-sentence, realized there was no point. People would believe what they chose to believe. Truth was irrelevant. He never tried to tell his story again. The conspiracy of silence was not organized. No one coordinated. The suppression, no central authority dictated what could be said. But the incentives aligned perfectly. Land speculators needed silence. Railroads needed silence. Governments needed silence. Churches preferred silence. Survivors chose silence. The result was comprehensive, effective, devastating. Within 20 years, the Three Winters had been nearly erased from collective memory. Within 50 years, they were completely forgotten. A climate catastrophe that killed thousands and destroyed. Hundreds of settlements simply disappeared from history, vanished, as if it never happened. But evidence remained, buried, hidden, waiting, in journals stuffed in attics, in letters preserved by accident, in graveyards with too many children's stones dated 1836 to 1838, in the population records that did not add up, in the archaeological evidence, in the tree rings, in the ice cores, in the gaps in genealogies where entire families simply ended. The evidence was there, scattered, fragmentary, ignored, but there, waiting for someone to look, someone to ask questions, someone to remember. Wait until you hear what we found. Modern science has uncovered what deliberate forgetting tried to erase. The evidence exists, scattered across disciplines, buried in places most people never think to look. But it is there, consistent, compelling, undeniable. The Three Winters happened, were as severe as survivors claimed, perhaps more severe than they could articulate. The truth has emerged slowly, piece by piece, building into a picture that validates everything the survivors tried to tell us. Tree ring analysis provides the most objective evidence. Trees record their growing conditions in their rings. Wide rings mean good growing seasons. Narrow rings mean stress, cold, drought, poor conditions. Researchers examining old-growth trees across the Midwest discovered something remarkable. The rings from 1836 to 1838 are extraordinarily narrow, some of the narrowest in the entire record. These trees were stressed, struggling, barely growing. The pattern is consistent across species, across regions, across thousands of individual trees. The cold was real, was widespread. Was severe. Ice core samples from Greenland tell a similar story. Each layer of ice preserves atmospheric conditions from when the snow fell. Chemical analysis reveals volcanic particulates, sulfur compounds, evidence of major eruptions. The layers from 1835 and 1836 show unusually high concentrations, multiple eruptions. The volcanic material entered the upper atmosphere, circled the globe, blocked sunlight, lowered temperatures, created the conditions for catastrophic cooling. The ice remembers what humans forgot. A volcanic eruption near Japan in late 1835 was particularly significant. Mount Osama, not as famous as Tombora, which caused a year without summer in 1816, but substantial, combined with other eruptions in the Pacific. In Central America, the cumulative effect was devastating. The particulates in the atmosphere created a cascade of cooling, blocked solar radiation, disrupted weather patterns. The effects were most severe in continental interiors, places far from moderating ocean influences, places like the American Midwest. Soil analysis from archaeological sites shows frost penetration to unusual depths. In normal years, frost might penetrate 12 to 18 inches. In the affected years, it went deeper, 24 inches, 30 inches. In some locations, the ground never fully thawed. Permafrost conditions in places that should never experience them. The soil remembers, holds evidence of cold that survivors described but scientists initially dismissed as impossible. Mass grave sites have been discovered during modern construction projects. A housing development in Michigan in 1985 uncovered a burial site. 47 bodies, men, women, children, no markers, no records. Carbon dating placed them in the late 1830s. The bones showed signs of extreme malnutrition, scurvy, rickets, starvation. Some showed evidence of violent death, circumstances no one wants to examine too closely. The site was quietly reburied, a small memorial placed. Most people who drive past have no idea what lies beneath. Cabin sites across the frontier show evidence of desperate measures. Archaeological excavations reveal layers that tell stories. Burned furniture, charred cabin walls, butchered animals that would normally never be eaten. Rats, squirrels. In one site in Indiana, researchers found evidence suggesting the inhabitants had eaten leather, boot leather, harness leather, anything that might contain nutrition. The desperation is written in the debris, in what people consumed, in what they burned, in how they died. Historical Society archives contain survivor accounts, journals that sat ignored for over a century. A diary from a woman in Illinois was donated in 1923, filed away, not examined until 1998. It documented day-by-day survival through all 3 winters. The declining food stores, the deaths of neighbors, the choices she made to keep her family alive, the guilt she carried. The final entry was in March 1838. It said simply that spring had come, that they had survived, that she did not know if survival was blessing or curse. The journal was published in 2005. 90 academics read it. The general public remained unaware. More journals continued to surface, in estate sales, in attics, in old trunks, in historical societies. Each one adds detail, adds confirmation, adds validation to what survivors tried to tell anyone who would. Listen. A journal from Ohio described November 1836. The cold that went beyond anything imaginable. The wind that never stopped. The children asking when they could go outside again. Being told maybe spring. Knowing spring might never come. The journal, as a matter of fact, unemotional, which makes it more powerful. The horror is in what is not said, in the gaps, in the things too terrible to write. Census records show the truth when examined carefully. The 1840 census recorded population in the affected territories. Researchers comparing it to 1830 projections found massive discrepancies. The expected population based on immigration rates and natural growth should have been far higher. Tens of thousands of people were simply missing, not relocated, not accounted for, gone. The census takers noted the discrepancies at the time. Their concerns were dismissed. The records were filed. The questions remained unasked for over a century. Statistical analysis reveals the scope of the catastrophe. Researchers in the late 20th century compiled data from multiple sources: church records, land claims, tax rolls, census data, letters, journals, everything available. They built demographic models. The model showed that approximately 15,000 families entered their affected territories between 1830 and 1835. The 1840 census showed fewer than 7,000 families. The missing 8,000 families represented perhaps 40,000 individuals. Some fled, but many died. The exact numbers will never be known, but the scale is clear. This was demographic catastrophe. Climate modeling supports the survivor accounts. Modern computers can simulate historical climate conditions, input the volcanic eruptions, the solar activity, the ocean currents, run the models, see what temperatures they produce. The models consistently show severe cooling in the continental interior from 1836 to 1838. Temperature drops of 10 to 15 degrees below normal. Extended growing seasons by 30 to 60 days. The kind of conditions that make agriculture nearly impossible. The kind of conditions that kill. The models validate what survivors said. Validate what written records document. Validate what physical evidence proves. A particularly compelling piece of evidence emerged in 2012, a locked trunk. Found in the basement of a historical society in Pennsylvania. Inside were letters, dozens of them. From frontier families to relatives back east, letters that never reached their destinations, letters that had been intercepted, saved by the postal clerk who could not bring himself to destroy them, but could not deliver them either. The letters described starvation, death, terror, desperate pleas for help that never came, because the letters never arrived. The trunk sat unopened for 170 years. The stories inside died with those who wrote them, until the trunk was finally opened, finally read, finally acknowledged. The letters paint a consistent picture. Cold that started early, that would not end. Food running out. Neighbors dying. Children dying. The grinding daily battle to survive another day. One letter from a mother in Michigan described watching her daughter grow thinner, watching her stop playing, stop laughing, stop being a child, becoming instead a small, starving creature focused only on survival. The letter was dated January 1837. It is unclear if the daughter survived. The mother's name appears in no later records. She likely died. The letter is her memorial, her testimony, her proof that she existed, that she suffered, that she tried. Genetic evidence provides another layer of confirmation. Population geneticists studying Midwest families found bottleneck events in the late 1830s, sudden reductions in genetic diversity, indicating that populations declined rapidly, that only certain family lines continued, that many lines ended completely. The genetic record shows what historical records obscured, shows the true impact, shows that entire family trees simply stop, branch after branch ending in the same narrow window. 1836 to 1838. Native American oral histories mention the hard years. Tribes in the affected regions have stories of the time when winter would not end, when buffalo disappeared, when people starved. The stories were not prominent, were overshadowed by other traumas, removal, disease, war, but the stories exist. Another source of validation, another voice confirming what happened, confirming that the cold was real, was widespread, was catastrophic for everyone in its path. European records provide external confirmation. Observers in England and France noted unusual weather patterns in North America, received reports from travelers, from ships, from traders. The reports described severe cold, crop failures, humanitarian disaster. These reports were published in European scientific journals, were discussed in academic circles, were known at the time, but were forgotten in America, were not incorporated into American historical narrative, were treated as foreign observations of foreign problems, not as documentation of American catastrophe. The evidence is overwhelming, undeniable, consistent across every discipline, every source, every method of inquiry. The 3 winters happened, were as bad as survivors claimed, killed thousands, destroyed hundreds of settlements, set back westward expansion by years, changed the trajectory of American development, and was systematically erased from memory, deliberately forgotten, buried under more palatable narratives. But the evidence remained, waiting, and now it speaks, loudly, clearly, demanding that we remember, demanding that we acknowledge, demanding that we ask why this was forgotten, and what else we have chosen to forget. Societies choose what to remember, what to forget, what stories to tell about themselves. America chose to remember triumph, chose to remember westward expansion as inevitable, as heroic, as the march of civilization across wilderness. The 3 winters did not fit that story, so they were erased, forgotten, not through conspiracy, exactly, but through collective decision that some truths are inconvenient. Some realities undermine necessary myths. Some histories are better left buried, but forgetting comes with costs. Modern Americans facing climate uncertainty have no cultural memory of how quickly weather can turn catastrophic, how fragile our systems truly are, how thin the line between civilization and survival. We believe we are insulated, protected, that technology and infrastructure make us safe. The pioneers believed they were prepared to. They had survived winters before, had skills, had experience, had confidence. They were wrong. Confidence is not armor. Preparation has limits. And nature does not care about human expectations. The pioneers who survived demonstrated extraordinary resilience. But resilience came at prices we can barely fathom. Psychological trauma that lasted lifetimes. Physical damage that shortened lives. Moral compromises that haunted until death. Relationships destroyed. Innocence shattered. Futures altered. They survived, but survival was not triumph, was not victory, was simply continuing to breathe, to move, to exist. Some days that was enough. Other days it was not. The Illinois family that lost their daughter eventually prospered. Their farm became successful. They appeared to outside observers as model frontier family, hard-working, productive, respectable. But the father never spoke of the hard years, not to his children, not to his neighbors, not to anyone. When he died in 1871, his wife burned his journal. She said it contained nothing anyone needed to know. The children did not question her, did not push. The family maintained silence until the last of them died. The story died with them. As so many stories did, the young couple in Michigan who nearly starved in February 1837 lived into old age. They watched their children grow, saw grandchildren born, built prosperity from the ruins of trauma, but they never truly healed. The wife developed hoarding behaviors, stored food obsessively, could not throw anything away, could not trust that abundance would continue. The fear never left. The husband, startled at sudden noises, had nightmares until he died, woke, screaming about cold, about hunger, about his daughter dying. They lived together for 40 years after the winters ended. But part of them never left those years, never fully returned to the present, always remained trapped in the cold, in the fear, in the desperate fight for survival. We need to remember their stories, need to understand what they endured, not to glorify suffering, not to romanticize hardship, but to recognize truth, to acknowledge that American expansion was built on uncounted graves, unforgotten tragedies, unerased catastrophes. The triumphant narrative is incomplete, is dishonest, is disrespectful to those who suffered, who died, who survived but carried wounds forever. Climate catastrophe can happen faster than we imagine. The pioneers of 1835 had no warning, no time to prepare. Within months, their world transformed from abundance to survival. They believed they were equipped for anything, believed their skills and determination were sufficient. they were wrong. Today, we believe similar things. Believe our technology protects us. Our infrastructure shields us. Our wealth insulates us. We may be wrong too. The lesson is not despair, is not that preparation is futile, is that respect for nature's power is essential, that humility matters, that confidence without caution is dangerous, that systems can collapse rapidly, that we are more vulnerable than we pretend, that forgetting painful truths does not make us safer, makes us more vulnerable, because those who forget history are condemned to repeat it, and those who never learnt it are condemned to be surprised. The pioneers who lived through those years are all gone now. The last survivors died in the early 20th century. They took their full stories with them, the memories, the details, the small human moments that made the horror real. We have fragments, evidence, documentation, but we do not have them. Do not have their voices, their perspectives, their truth in its fullness. That loss is permanent, irretrievable, another cost of the forgetting, another price of erasure. But on cold nights, in old cabins scattered across the Midwest, some say you can still hear something. The wind howling the way it did then, relentless, hungry, patient, the creaking of wood under extreme cold, the silence that came after the last piece of furniture was burned, the sounds of a world frozen beyond endurance. Perhaps it is just wind, just old buildings settling, just imagination. Or perhaps the land remembers, perhaps the earth holds memory, perhaps those who suffered left something of themselves in the soil, in the trees, in the stones, a presence, a witness, a reminder. Winter always remembers, even when we choose to forget.